Fraser, the life story of a Christmas tree. Fraser had lived on this North Carolina mountain all of his life. Fraser lived on the side of a beautiful mountain. He lived there in the summer and in the winter and in each lovely season in between. You see, Fraser was a tree, not just an ordinary tree, but a very special tree. Fraser belonged to the fir family, for his full name was Fraser Fir. Many centuries ago, his ancestor trees came here frozen as little seeds in a great river of ice that moved south from the Great Lakes. When this ice melted, the seeds grew into trees. They looked just like Fraser. The firs liked the cool, wet mountainsides, and soon they grew near the tops of the highest mountains. As the old trees died, their seeds became seedlings, and these little trees grew into big ones. When the families who had come to live in these mountains wanted the most perfect tree for their Christmas tree, they went out in the woods and found a fir like Fraser. Other families began to come up to Avery County here in North Carolina to find a Christmas tree. One tree even went to the White House to be the president's Christmas tree. Mr. Neiman Marcus put a picture of Fraser's granddaddy in his catalog and sold these beautiful trees to people all over the country. Soon the folks in Avery County were planting seedlings in long rows up one side of the mountains and down the other side. That's where Fraser was planted, on a steep hill where he looked down on a bend in the Tow River. For 8 years, Fraser had watched the snowfall and the sunshine on his hill and on the distant mountains. He often wondered what he had been put on earth to become. Fraser had lots of brothers and sisters. Each spring, Bud Johnson, who lived in the middle of acres and acres of trees, would cut the tough grass between the rows and put plant food around the tree roots. Each summer he would trim the wild boughs of each tree to make them healthy and to help them grow thick and green and tall. Fraser's best friend was named Stump. Stump, who was much older than Fraser, told him all about becoming a Christmas tree. Stump told Fraser that growing up on the hill and being pruned and cared for meant that Fraser would one day leave the hill and go to be a family's most perfect Christmas tree. Stump had been on the hill facing Grandfather Mountain for many years. He watched as fir family members got planted and grew up and left, one generation after another. Stump was not a fir. Stump was, in fact, a stump. He was what was left of an old maple tree. Mr. Johnson had left him there because Stump had strong roots to help hold up the steep hill while Fraser and his brothers and sisters put down their roots. Each year Fraser learned new things from wise old Stump. Once Stump told Fraser that a long time ago, the native hunters who came to hunt in these mountains talked to the trees and gave each tree and mountain a name. They believed each tree had a soul, and the spirit of each tree lived forever. Fraser learned too about waiting patiently for his turn. He learned the importance of being a tree and of taking his place one day in the center of a great celebration. Fraser tried to imagine what it would be like. As the soft snow fell on December nights, he looked across the valley to the homes with bright lights in their windows, and he thought, maybe next year. Then one sunny October day, as maple leaves were turning orange, Fraser saw Mr. Johnson walking between the rows of Fraser firs. He carried colored ribbons, and when he came to Fraser, he tied a bright blue band to his very tip-top. Fraser knew from what Stump had told him that this year he had been chosen for the harvest. Then in November, the sound of power saws filled the air, and Mr. Johnson came with his saw and stood by Fraser. "Is this the one you want?" he shouted to the family at the foot of the hill. "Yes, yes," cried an excited little girl. The sawdust flew, and Fraser fell to the ground. The great adventure meant leaving his hillside home, but it was what Fraser had been waiting for all these years. Fraser was lifted first to a wide wagon pulled by a tractor, and then into a strange noisy machine called a baler. The baler folded Fraser's bouncy boughs against his trunk. A cord wrapped round and round turned him into a tight green bundle. Fraser didn't feel very beautiful as he was tied to the top of a station wagon, but he had a great view from up there. What Fraser saw as they sped down the highway were many other firs. Some were alone like Fraser, but others were riding side by side, standing up in great long trucks. Some were laid flat in pickup trucks or piled high on trailers. As Fraser left Cow Camp Road, he looked back to see Stump for the last time. Stump was still there near Fraser's three little fir sisters, firs who had another year to dream of taking this wonderful journey. Christmas was better than Fraser ever dreamed it would be. He found himself in the center of a beautiful room and the object of everyone's attention. Every green bough was hung with lovely cherished ornaments and tiny lights. At his top, Fraser held an angel, which made him feel that he reached from earth to heaven. The children danced around him, and the gifts they scattered beneath him made Fraser feel that he was indeed the happiest and the most perfect tree that God ever made. Stump had told Fraser that the celebration always ends, and that even the tallest and the greenest and the fairest of Christmas trees comes down and is carried away. The lights and ornaments are packed up for another year. Fraser felt sad. He looked sad too, lying there naked beside the discarded garlands and wreaths. He thought about his life as a tree. It did make him happy to think about his growing up years and the happiness he had given by being more than just a tree, a Christmas tree. Giving his life for others, that's what he had done. A family that had celebrated with him would never be the same. Together they had given and received joy and added to their memories. As Fraser lay there, thinking about life on that gloomy day in January, the little girl, whose name was Jeannie, stood by him again. "Daddy," she said, "why don't we put our tree up by the bird feeder? The birds can find a home in its branches. It's still so green, it can't be dead." For the rest of the winter, Fraser stretched out his arms, and the birds flocked to his branches. Red cardinals, a titmouse, and a nuthatch made themselves at home. They came every day to find the suet ball that Jeannie hung from the lowest bough. When the last snowfall had melted, Fraser was still green, but he knew he would not be a Christmas tree again. He wondered, what's next for me in this life? And one day Fraser felt himself being lifted back on top of the station wagon. Jeannie sat by her daddy, and they drove to Lake Norman. They carried Fraser out on their dock. They tied a big rock to his trunk. They dropped that heavy rock into the lake. "This is a good place for our tree, Daddy," Jeannie was saying. the little fish will have a safe place to hide in its branches. Fraser felt himself sinking. His whole life flashed before him. He was a seed, a seedling, a growing tree, a Christmas tree, now a haven for the birds, and now a habitat for the fish. Fraser felt very much alive, and still the most perfect tree God ever made. Part of Fraser had never left the mountains. When he had been chosen and taken home that first December day, he was too tall for the house where Jeannie lived. Her daddy had cut off the bottom of Fraser's trunk, and before they put Fraser on a tree stand, they pulled that short stump and its stubby boughs down the hill behind their house. Jeannie remembered that day when she walked in the woods the next year and found brown needles and what was left of Fraser. She felt Fraser's spirit was still there, and she decided to ask her daddy to do one more thing. In his shop, she watched him cut and carve, and soon he handed Jeannie a piece of wood on a leather cord. In the wood was carved a face. It was the face of a wise wood spirit. It was Fraser Fur. Fraser's spirit lives on to remind Jeannie, where there is love, life never ends.